Hey everybody, happy Halloween. This is Derek Judd, the Cowboy Criminologist, here with Cowboy Criminology. So, uh, law school has kind of taken its toll. There's been a lot going on. We've had uh, a lot of projects, a lot of events, just things kind of popping up at the last minute that uh, have taken up more time than I was hoping they would. But that's just kind of the. See if I can fix my light here. uh, just kind of one of those things that pops up when you're doing a big program like this. So unfortunately, Five Nights of Terror did not go the way I thought it would. It would, but being that it's Halloween, I'm going to go ahead and read the sections from my book that I'd promised or been promising y'all, and so that'll give you something kind of fun to look forward to. Um, the book sales, uh, going pretty good. Not as great as I'd like, but I mean, I think that that's kind of a constant with most writers. Um, I've had let's see, one, two, three. I've had four people in my class buy my book, which has been very very cool. It's kind of weird to see people walking around and they're carrying a copy of my book with them, which is awesome. And I especially want to thank Carlos. Carlos has been a big promoter of my book and getting people excited about it. So, Carlos, I want to say thank you for that. Um, as far as everything else goes, fixing to start the 12th week of the law school program, which is, I mean, it's going by, it's going by real quick. Uh, but I think a lot of that has to do with just the fact that I stay so busy. But so if you joined me for the last time, it was kind of an introduction to monsters and how we think of monsters. Um, Interesting side note. So just after I did my book launch, there was a case, and I'll have to remember where it was, but the details of the case follow the hypothetical scenario at the end of the book. And uh, if you think you might have an idea about the case I'm talking about, it's the young lady who ended up uh, killing and dismembering her mother. And when they came into the house, they found her mother's remains being cooked on the stove. Shockingly similar to what I had in here. And the thing is you can sit there and say that these kind of things are very unique uh, and very rare. And I think you wouldn't be wrong in saying that, but in criminological terms, these things can happen. And so when you know that they can happen, I think that takes away some of the rareness, some of the uniqueness. But you can read about that in the conclusions section of Monsters Have Always Walked Among Us. Some very I mean, it's not a point by point. Uh, the fact pattern isn't point by point. Um, in my fact pattern, it had more to do with a young couple in the throes of trying to find themselves through occultism and things like that. And in this young lady's case, apparently, uh, it's believed that she has sustained a traumatic brain injury and that she's acting completely out of character uh, for the people that have known and cared for her all of her life. So it's a very very tragic thing to have happened. But kind of listening to the details that are coming out on that case, and I'll try and do a video of that coming up here in the next couple weeks. You can you almost have to wonder if there hasn't always been a fantasy there, or how did she end up taking this course of action? Because regardless of the end result, there are certain things at play when you take that kind of action. And so there's almost always some sort of dark fantasy, and maybe it's something that normally somebody wouldn't act on, but under the right conditions, like a traumatic brain injury, um, especially in the right portion of the brain that controls your impulses, your inhibitions, your impulsiveness, that could certainly be a large factor. Now, it'd be interesting to see how that case shakes out. So I want to read this first section is going to be from the witches portion of Monsters Have Always Walked Among Us. And this is very interesting because the research I found in talking specifically about witch hunting, which vampires, werewolves, and witches were a huge, huge part of that. And of course, you have the Reformation, you have the Age of Enlightenment, you have all of these things within the span of a few centuries that are kind of taking over. And so people are trying to grapple with the world that around them and trying to understand it in the terms and uh, in the terms that they can understand for the day. Uh, we do that today. What we consider science fact, uh, civilizations in years to come might sit back and look back on it and say, what were these barbarians doing? And for us right now, it's the cutting edge uh, of state of the art science and technology. My dad and I talked about this several times over the last few years. It's amazing what procedures are done in a doctor's office now. When 50, 60 years ago, I mean, it was a trip to the hospital, and you got a visit from the doctor saying, you need to have your affairs in order because these are the complications. And so it's it's interesting how things change and how our perception of science, technology, one thing or another changes. But in this section, especially when I was learning about witch hunts, fantastic reading, and I'm gonna put a link to an article. It's actually one of my professors, Dr. Bree Sherwin. She did her own research on the Salem witch trials and witch hunting, and how it's become a catch-all political term for politicians who feel like they're being oppressed. Uh, I don't necessarily agree with the socio-political side of it, although it's hard to ignore. But it's a very well written article. It's definitely worth it. It's an academic read, but it's a very easy read. It's got a lot of good things in there uh, about how witch hunts kind of evolved, and so it really kind of made me feel better about my research, because when I was reading that article, which is published in, well, I'll put the link in there, but it was actually published in a law review journal. Uh, so it's had the necessary vetting and everything. Uh, but a fantastic article. It really is. If you're interested in that, I think it's definitely worth a read. But anyway, so we'll jump right in here with this right here. If you exist in a time and place where cruelty and sadism are qualities that are appreciated because of how they are applied, this creates a peculiar set of circumstances. Without diving too deep into criminal profiling, please permit me to create a scenario for you. A boy is born into a working class family that is neither poor nor rich. The father strictly disciplines the boy, discipline being the only time the father has any use for his son. The mother dotes on the boy, but the father chastises the mother because he does not want his son to be weak. The boy grows strong and takes on his father's brutish attitude towards women. And while he loves his mother, he firmly believes that women should be seen and not heard. Finally, one night, the mother can no longer deal with the insults, abuse, and boorish behavior, and she flees into the darkness. It is later discovered that the boy's mother has remarried, and the boy's father begins to vent his frustrations on his son, perhaps by complaining that he looks too much like her, acts like her, or that it was not for him, the man's wife would still be with him. The boy, now a young man, takes on an apprenticeship and becomes active in his church, where he meets a respectable young lady from a good family. They marry, but the young man takes on his father's abusive behavior. They conceive a child together, but sadly the child dies at birth. The young man blames his wife for the child's death, and the woman, reeling from losing a child, begins acting strange. She is visiting a strange woman who lives on the outskirts of town, is given to recite in strange words in an unfamiliar language, and keeps a collection of ominous-looking herbs and powders. The woman is up all night and appears to speak into the darkness to someone or something the man cannot see. The woman is out walking by a river and sees a small child. She wraps the child in her arms and walks into the river, where she drowns them both. The man is in church listening to accusation that his wife was working in concert with a heretic woman suspected of being a witch. While listening to the sermon, the man becomes convinced that witches must be removed from the earth. Now that he knows what to look for in a witch, he can stop them, and hopefully by killing them with the blessing of the church, he will be able to break the woman's pact with the devil and save her immortal soul. The man talks to the priest and learns the methods laid out in Maleficarium. Finally sanctioned by his spiritual leader, he is ready to perform his holy duty to determine whether the heretic woman possessing his wife is a witch. The man reads the charge to the elderly woman, who refuses to look at the man or recognize that he is speaking to her. He looks around and sees tongs with sharpened ends glowing red hot in the fire. A sharpened spear of some sort is being boiled in holy water. She looks to her left and sees the rack and an assortment of clubs and whips. She is surrounded by a grinding wheel sharpening the edge of a knife and an axe. And she knows that she will not survive long. The man demands that the woman's clothing be stripped from her body. The man carefully inspects the woman's body, looking for devil marks. Doctors and midwives verified these marks upon examination of the accused witch's body. In this instance, medical proof in the courtroom verified supernatural powers. The marks could be anything such as an unsightly mole, skin tag, growth, or heaven forbid, an extra appendage or nipple was found. Anything that would not be considered normal. Unfortunately, the woman has no marks. The crowd gasps and looks at him in confusion. What is the man to do? The people need proof of witchcraft. The man must prove this woman is a bride of Satan, bent on destroying everything good, pure, and Christian. The man picks up a pair of pincers, admonishes the woman for never coming to church, and accuses her of being in league with the devil. When he asks if the woman denies she serves the devil, the red-hot pincers bite into her breast and remove flesh before answering. In anguish, she howls and curses the man in the most unladylike manner. She curses the man and tells the people he is why his mother ran off. Offended, the man uses the pincers to bite down on the thigh of the woman. She screams out in pain. The man asks her if she believes in the Lord our God. Before she can answer, a sharp knife is raked across her right arm, and a large piece of skin falls to the ground next to her. All she can do is yell, "No." The man pleads with the woman, but she is possessed by the devil and is placed on the rack to have her limbs stretched. She begins to thrash and tear at the ropes holding her to the rack, and as her legs and arms are stretched beyond her limits, She goes ghostly pale and begins muttering in a language no one can comprehend. All bearing witness to the inquisitor see that the woman feels no pain. She is indeed a witch. The trial concluded, the inquisitor ordered the woman burned alive at the stake to protect the community from this succubus. As the man watches the woman burn, he is overcome with pride in his work. He feels oddly fulfilled. There is something about his actions treating a woman in this manner, a way that no respectable man would treat a woman of character and good breeding. He is overcome with lust. He can inflict the cruelest torture on a person, and he is a hero of the Christian faith because he did this foul deed for God. Perhaps the first time. However, in the future, he will find it difficult to control his lust as he tortures his next witch. This may sound overly simple and far-fetched, but I assure you that many serial killers fell into a similar pattern because of the perfect storms in their lives. How terrifying is it to think that someone could become a criminal murderer, yet given the right time and place, could be revered for extracting confessions and executing threats to Christendom. Remember what I said about the possibility of serial killers existing within the ranks of military, but the fact of how they are revered and how they have an outlet for their desire to kill, or even the need to be thought of as a warrior, keeps that person on the side of good. A little bit of food for thought for you, isn't there? So, that was the witch. That was part of the witches section. Y'all, the research that went into this book, it was a lot of fun to do. But I think the witches and zombies section were the hardest because there's no clear-cut definition for a zombie. And on the other side of that, there's no clear-cut definition for what a witch is. As a matter of fact, the term witch actually changes region to region, culture to culture, and era to era. So it was all over the map, and so I finally had to draw, kind of develop my own bright line for what I was looking for. And the interesting thing to think about with witches is that witches are almost always going to be synonymous with poisoners. Interesting thing to think about. So I want to move you to zombies. Like I said, zombies was a great chapter, or was a great section of the book to write. And I'm going to be honest with you, I was a little disappointed. I thought there'd be a little more, but a lot of that came from my own misunderstanding of what a zombie actually is. And so, the nice thing about this book is it can help kind of clear up some of those misconceptions that you have, as well as give you a better understanding. And of course, when you start a project like this, it's very easy to kind of fold your arms and say, "Oh, I've got this in the bag. This is going to be easy, and this is going to be a cakewalk, and man, I've got this down." But you find out pretty quick, man, there's a lot to this. So I want to read you this section about a verified, honest to goodness zombie. It's not what you think, and it, in a lot of ways, it may not be as exciting, but if you really think about it, get to the truth behind the true crime, you will see that this instance of a real life zombie is probably even more horrifying than what you see on the big screen. In a small Haitian village, a man approaches a woman and claims to be her deceased brother. The man reveals details only those with the closest ties to the family would have known. However, the intimate details provided by the stranger to the woman caused her to pause and think, how could this person know this about my brother? My brother is dead. I was there when he was buried in the cemetery. Intrigued? 18 years had passed since Angelina Narcisse had said goodbye to her brother, yet a man was standing before her claiming to be her brother Claverius. Sorry, a research section in here, and I'm trying to go back and forth about whether I want to cite that or not. Claverius's conversation with Angeline, as the man tells Angeline, he remembered that night well. He knew when he was lowered into the grave because he was fully conscious, although he could not speak or move. As the earth was thrown over his coffin, he felt as if he were floating over the grave. The scar on his right cheek, he said, was caused by a nail driven through the casket. What happened to Claverius next would chill the blood of even the bravest. Claverius says that after he was buried, a voodoo priest dug him out of his grave and beat him with a whip before he was taken to a sugar plantation with other zombies. He was forced to work as an enslaved person. Only with the death of the zombie master were they able to escape, and Narcisse eventually returned home. While zombie sightings in Haiti are not uncommon, the story told by Claverius has medical documentation from a hospital stating that he died on May 3rd, 1962. After he sought medical treatment for coughing up blood accompanied by fever and body aches. Naturally, a case such as that of Claverius Narcisse drew attention from the worlds of psychiatry and pharmacology. When ethnobotanist Wade Davis found a voodoo priest willing to show him how to harvest the ingredients to make coup de poudre, Davis learned that when the powder is rubbed into the victim's skin, absorption, within hours he begins to feel nauseated and has difficulty breathing. A pins and needles sensation afflicts his arms and legs, then progresses to the whole body. The suspect becomes paralyzed. His lips turn blue for lack of oxygen. Quickly, within 6 hours, his metabolism is lowered to the level almost indistinguishable from death. When Davis learned that the voodoo priest cultivated tetrodotoxin from a species of pufferfish, Davis referenced Japanese studies on people who were poisoned by eating fugu, who had also been pronounced dead, yet mysteriously came back to life. In the sections on vampires and werewolves, we hypothesized that unflattering monster labels were placed on people because of their perceived standing within a community. For example, Davis interviewed Narcisse and a female victim known as Little Woman or Tifeme, and found that they were viewed as persona non grata in their communities. Furthermore, Davis learned that Tifeme was regarded as a thief. Narcisse had abandoned his children and deprived his brother of land that was rightfully his. Equally suggestive, Narcisse claimed that that his aggrieved brother had sold him to a Bokor, a voodoo priest who dealt in black magic. He made cryptic reference to having been tried and found guilty by the masters of the land. In his book, The Serpent and the Rainbow, contains a fictional account of Davis's discovery. It is unsettling how closely the zombification process of Haiti and the voodoo religion mirror what we have learned in previous chapters. First, we have someone characterized as having a negative virtue or virtues. Second, because of their virtue or lack thereof, the person becomes afflicted with a monstrous condition: vampirism, lycanthropy, or zombification. Third, the person is compelled to conduct themselves in a manner not typical of normal humans, drinking blood, killing people in the woods with their hands and teeth, or being controlled by a supernatural power. Y'all, you talk about getting to the truth behind true crime, the zombie section of this book. If you're wanting the Hollywood horror version, you're probably going to be disappointed. But if you're really interested in the truth about zombies and what they are or aren't based on actual scientific research, I think you're going to be very, very excited. So let's see here. Well, it's Halloween, so you know we got to do it, because seriously, what would Halloween be without a good story about vampires, right? So I want to read you a little excerpt from the vampires section. However, we should also consider that types of behaviors, mores, deviancy, and criminal acts that may have been common in Greece or Egypt during this time would have given rise to the need to explain vampirism. The phrase, "the worst boogeyman is in the mirror," is used to say that what we fear most is found within ourselves. What scares us the most are the behaviors we display or observe that we try to ignore or cannot explain, contain, or conceal, but which we fear we might harbor as well. Remember, my dear readers, nothing happens in a vacuum, so knowing this, we can safely assume that something had spurred the creation of a blood-drinking creature. After all, necessity is the mother of all invention, and art always imitates life. Let us think about this from a criminological perspective, and for this we will imagine ourselves in ancient times. We know of an odd person who lives on the fringes of society. This person only comes out at night, and ghastly occurrences are reported after this person is seen outside of their home in the nighttime. Livestock is killed, people report terrifying encounters with the individual. They may even know this person is drinking an animal's blood, or worse, the blood of another human, a respectable one at that. What are we to make of this? Human beings have a primal urge to keep themselves and their offspring safe. Few things are more horrific to imagine than someone taking the life of another. Still, when a life is taken in a particularly gruesome manner, it is often categorized as supernatural, evil, and inhuman. It forces us to search for explanations. This behavior would have been subject to the interpretation of the times in which the myth was written that the person is a god in human form punishing humanity for perceived transgressions. This can also be true in times of famine, war, drought, and any artificial or natural disaster that can force us to reach for explanations of the unexplainable, no matter how nonsensical. This behavior at the time would have been attributed to the devil or other evil supernatural entities, especially in ancient, medieval, and puritanical times. We will search for answers only as broadly as our knowledge base will allow us to forge, but then our imagination runs away with us. The body will not go, and by extension cannot go, where the mind is not gone. So if you remember back to the beginning of the video when I talked about there's a case right now actively going through the trial process, pre-trial process, I said that the body cannot go, and by extension cannot go where the mind has not been. And that kind of sets up my hypothesis for maybe this individual has been harboring some dark fantasies, dark thoughts, maybe longer than anybody realized. There are few historical records of human vampires from the 1300s BC to 1500s AD, aka the Renaissance. Why? We have two great and ancient civilizations that acknowledge vampirism, yet no one is specifically or categorically named as a vampire before 1640. Although there is a small scattering of alleged vampiric activity, little documentation supports these allegations as anything more than myth. Here's where we need to try and understand why this happened. The first conclusion is that societies of the time did not have anyone who was ever caught practicing vampirism. This is unlikely because Egyptians and Greeks frequently documented the world around them. Again, we must think of the world that existed before applying the new theory or philosophy. For 1,200 years, there appears to be no accounts or factual records of vampires. Where did it go? Did it fall out of fashion as vampires, werewolves, and zombies rise and fall out in and out of style today? Did people grow weary of vampire lore, or did we need to have a significant crime occur during one of the most profoundly religious periods in our planet's development? It is vital at this point that we discuss contextualization. Contextualization, for our purposes, is taking a theory of principle and applying it to a period more than a century ago, or thinking of criminal activity in terms of the time's cultural, societal, and theological norms. For example, many reading this book may be familiar with Vlad Tepes III, Vlad Dracula, the Romanian ruler, known for ruthlessly sending messages, literally written in blood, to his enemies. While there is certainly some truth to Vlad's brutality, one must keep in mind three issues to keep Vlad in context. First, during the reign of Vlad Tepes III, Romania was under constant threat from the Ottoman Empire. Second, while extreme, Vlad's manner of dealing with his enemies was not unusually barbaric for the time or place. Finally, acts attributed to Vlad were greatly exaggerated, most likely by the Saxons. These exaggerations of Vlad Dracula mythos were what captivated Bram Stoker's imagination 400 years later to create Dracula. There's a famous line from the John Ford classic, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. In the dialogue, screenwriters James Warner, Bella, and Willis Goldbeck write dialogue that says, "When the legend becomes fact, print the legend." This implies that when the truth is not as sensational as the legend, there is a compulsion to tell the lore and add to the tale. Vlad Tepes III is the perfect example of the need for contextualization. Remember, Vlad Dracula's actions were viewed through a lens of Victorian propriety and Christian ethics that would certainly have been shocking at any time in history. However, the only thing the British enjoyed and continue to enjoy today more than a gruesome tabloid story is pretending they don't enjoy them at all. It is safe to say that we all do to some context. Case in point, you probably didn't stumble upon this book by accident. You're fascinated by the ideas of monsters and serial killers, and this book combines the two. Shameless plug. Do you enjoy scary movies, suspense, psychological thrillers, or out-and-out gore fest? If you do, I encourage you to quit reading this book. After hearing the true stories about serial killers, you will realize Hollywood, even with an NC-17 rating, is only capable of a Disney-esque version of serial killers that after time does a little to scare you. You will probably spend a great deal of time picking apart the criminological and psychological mistakes and ruin the film for yourself as well as those around you. For our study, this year is 1656, and we find ourselves in a village in what is now Croatia. There is a monster loose in the town. The beast is known to the village because he was one of them. For 16 years after his death, a man was believed to be a strigan, one who feeds on the blood of children while they are alive, so they have power to return from the dead. The undead is Yuri Grando, who habitually knocks on villagers' doors around midnight. After a visit from Yuri, someone in the household would become ill and die. Unfortunately, like other Strigons, Yuri preferred to visit widows and have his way with them. One of his victims was his own widow. The townspeople had finally had enough of Grando terrorizing the village and decided to do the only logical thing they could do: kill the dead guy again. And this time, make sure he stayed dead. After unsuccessfully stabbing Grando with wooden stakes that did not penetrate his body, Grando's head was sawn off at the beginning of the process. Grando's corpse let out a blood-curdling scream as blood gushed from the wound. Of course, this desecration was done under the watchful eye of the village priest. What a fascinating story for the first documented person accused of what we think of today as vampirism. Little is known about Grando's life, but it is unlikely that a tale like this would have been made up by a beloved or respected person in town. Could this have happened? So that's a great little story about Yuri Grando. And what I like about it is there's just enough scientific fact to be plausible. And I go into more of the medical aspects on why a corpse might do that, why it might still bleed, things like that. And it really is just an illusion of how we perceive it. So if you want to learn more about that, the vampire section is great. So y'all, I want to share my absolute favorite section of the book is the werewolf section. It was the most fun to write. It was very, very cool. Let me go back to vampires really quick. So with vampires, you always need to think about, well, actually, I probably need to go back to zombies. Zombies, you have to know, are deprived of all free will. And there's a section in Zombies where I talk about the defense of atomization. And basically, that is somebody commits a crime, but does so because they have absolutely no control over themselves. Um, think about somebody who's driving down the road and all of a sudden is overcome by a seizure or a series of spasms, a severe muscle cramp, heart attack, and they inadvertently drive off the road and hit a bicyclist on the side of the road. They would have a defense to atomization because they were in the middle of a medical emergency. Well, atomization goes even a step further. And if you want to know more about that and learn about how the Bocors will actually keep somebody under their control through coercion of their faith, knowledge of psychological principles, and of course a working knowledge of chemistry and pharmacology. It's a wonderful way to really kind of learn about a legal aspect to zombies. In none of my research have I ever been able to find anybody who was killed by a zombie. Although there is a case about a zombie hunter who ended up being a serial killer. That's a case out of Arizona. That's a great case. Vampires. When you think about vampires, like witches, you think poisoning. Anytime you talk about somebody who's labeled a vampire, like the Vampire of Dusseldorf, who you'll read about in this book, you can always associate that with blood drinking. Now, most of the time, if somebody refers to themselves as a vampire, they're a hanger-on, or have trouble separating fantasy from reality. Most of the time, the vampire moniker is thrust on somebody because of the way they chose to kill. I talk about Peter Kürten in here, and I also talk about a couple of other serial killers who are either identified as vampires or werewolves, depending on how they dispatch their victims. Vampire, of course, you can always associate with blood drinking. Now, with werewolves, always associate that with cannibalism. Because, at least for werewolves, the cannibalism part is indistinguishable. Whereas for a vampire, it's a lot easier to make that distinction. All right. So I want to read this last section for you for your to finish up Halloween for you. But really, I'd appreciate it if you take a look at this book. It's available in several different formats on Amazon. It's on Kindle. It's on. You can buy the paperback. You can buy the hardback on Amazon. It's also coming to Google Books and Barnes and Noble here pretty soon. So very excited about that. So without further delay, here we go. The myth begins in Arcadia, which is ruled by King Light. Sorry, I'm having a hard time talking tonight. By King. I'm sorry, I don't know why I can't pronounce it. The myth begins in Arcadia, which is ruled by King Lycaon, a king who incurred Zeus's wrath for his refusal to worship the gods of Olympus. Zeus decides to test Lycaon and comes to Arcadia disguised as a human. When a rumor begins circulating that a god was among the people, Lycaon was angered and vowed to test any god who revealed himself. When Zeus came before Lycaon, Lycaon decided he would trick Zeus into eating human flesh and planned to kill the king of the gods. Zeus, of course, was not fooled and turned Lycaon into a wolf. Several versions of this story exist, but they all require the transformation of man into beast and cannibalism as the two main points that begin our werewolf creation. For those of you who have been paying attention, the king of the story's name is named Lycaon, and he was turned into a wolf. Thus, we have discovered the etymology of the term lycanthrope. So much easier to pronounce. In the late 1200 ADs, in Nordic mythology, a father and son, the Volsungs, found wolf pelts that could transform themselves into wolves for 10 days and then went out on a killing spree. These myths and legends helped inspire the idea of men turning into werewolves. However, we are still far from the werewolf we know today. As we learned in the last section, contextualization in criminology is everything. The idea of people transforming themselves into other people, animals, or objects is an idea as old as humans. Nevertheless, we still have limited knowledge of why people commit violent crimes. Yes, even today, we still attempt to contextualize human behavior, yet instead of myths, folklore, and fairy tales, we use criminological theory, psychology, and medicine. To some, this may be a distinction without a difference. However, it does lead one to wonder what readers will think of this book's contextualization in the next 1 to 5 centuries as our understanding grows and the morals and values of society evolve. So why did humans decide on the wolf as the familiar to a deranged killer? As with many aspects of ancient life, the phases of the moon were largely thought to control human behavior. Even today, those who have worked in law enforcement as first responders, correctional officers, or healthcare workers believe that a full moon brings out the crazies. It is easy for people who do not work nights or in the above listed occupations to laugh off the full moon connection. Those who have served in such capacities tend to watch the moon's phases more carefully and cautiously than farmers and astronomers, but significantly less than astrologists or your average Wiccan. Whether because of its use in horror movies, ghost stories, and personal biases, the theories behind lunar influence on abnormal behavior has been subject to extensive scientific study, with most finding no statistically significant rises in criminality. However, a correlation exists that is undoubtedly worth exploring. A guy named Thanker hypothesized that criminal behavior increased during a full moon because of the moon's gravitational effect on humans, which he called human tidal waves. This is like living in a windy area where air becomes laden with positively charged ions, which is not a plus, as they can adversely affect your mental health and emotional well-being, making days seem longer and negatively impacting our moods. People have often associated abnormal behavior with the phases of the moon. For example, the word lunatic was first used by St. Jerome while writing the Vulgate Bible in the 4th century. The Latin word was lunaticus, meaning moonstruck. Although, according to Nassau, St. Jerome described epilepsy and not aberrant criminal activity or criminal behavior. Purpura found that the increase in criminal activity had more to do with the ambient light available, making it easier for criminals to be discreet. It could be argued that this would benefit criminals. However, one should not dismiss that people would also tend to be more observant during a full moon. I actually really like that theory. I think it makes a lot more sense than some of the other ones that are out there. But I also think you need to be careful because I think it can cut both ways. As people tend to be out more on a really nice moonlit night, just kind of looking around and seeing what's going on. So I really see that going both ways. So I want to finish with this. We have come to an exciting place on our road to discovery. Think of your fairy tale. Think of your favorite fairy tales. My goodness, I don't know what's going on with me. I'm willing to bet the ones you enjoy are Disney or at least Disney adjacent. Those of Charles Perrault, Hans Christian Andersen, and the Brothers Grimm were never intended to instill a sense of happily ever after, as we discussed earlier. It is no accident that the scariest thing about Perrault and the Brothers Grimm is that the original fairy tales often featured rape, mutilation, murder, cannibalism, kidnapping, and stalking. The wolf is the second largest apex predator in Europe, and wolves have always been viewed as a predator and a menace. While the more powerful bear was worthy of instilling the most fear, the wolf's reputation for ferocity when attacking its prey made men see something in that behavior that made them think of the wolf as almost human. What inspired Little Red Riding Hood, or the Wolf and the Seven Young Kids? While Perrault and the Brothers Grimm did not originate the idea of many of their fairy tales, they had the foresight to record their iterations of the tales for posterity. While these fairy tales have been in the public consciousness for centuries, we still must wonder why wolves. Perrault sums up his reasoning at the end of Little Red Riding Hood. Watch out if you have not learned that tame wolves are the most dangerous of all. I say, wolf, for all wolves are not the same sort. There is one kind with an amenable disposition, neither noisy nor hateful, nor angry but tame, obliging and gentle, following the young maids in the streets, even to their homes. Alas, who does not know that these gentle wolves are all of such creatures the most dangerous? My research into especially Perrault and the Brothers Grimm was fascinating. I really think they were amateur criminologists. I think there's so much good stuff going on there, and even if you really read the original fairy tales and kind of read between the lines of what they're saying, there really is a lot of stuff there that you kind of have to sit there and go, okay, wow, that's insane. That's crazy to think about that. But y'all, if you get the chance, go to Amazon and pick up Monsters Have Always Walked Among Us. Vampires, werewolves, zombies, and witches, how serial killers help create the monsters that we fear. I'm very proud of it. It turned out very good. Y'all, I apologize for not getting these out to you sooner and kind of having to dump them on you. Y'all have a happy and safe Halloween, and I'm going to be back with another video inspired by a classroom discussion from law school. So anyway, y'all take care. I'm Derek Judd, the Cowboy Criminologist for Cowboy Criminology. I'll see you next time.